Welcome to the Shaw Consulting Podcast. In this episode, we're turning our attention to enterprise architecture and why it's become a critical issue for social housing providers. As organisations juggle legacy systems, regulatory pressure, and digital ambition, is enterprise architecture the missing link between strategy and delivery? I'm your host, Stuart, and today I'm joined by Shaw Consulting MD, Chris Shaw. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Stuart.
Right, Chris. To start us off, when we talk about enterprise architecture and social housing, what do we actually mean and why does it matter beyond the IT teams in an organisation?
So when we talk about enterprise architecture and social housing, we're essentially talking about how the organisation fits together people, processes, data, and technology. So it's not an IT exercise, it's a business-wide blueprint that helps providers understand how they operate today and more importantly, where they need to get to tomorrow. It matters because every major challenge the sector is dealing with, customer experience, compliance, asset safety, value for money, data quality, relies on systems, people and processes working in a coordinated way. Without that blueprint, organizations make isolated decisions, create duplication, or introduce risk without really realizing it. So enterprise architecture gives leaders that visibility and control they need to make joined up decisions that support strategy, not undermine it.
So, Chris, from that answer, it sounds like it's pretty critical. So many housing providers, as we know, have grown their IT infrastructure through mergers, system layering, and tactical fixes. What risks do organisations face when their architecture evolves without a clear design or governance?
Yeah, no, that's right. Sure. I mean, the biggest risk is that complexity grows silently in the background until it becomes unmanageable. You see duplicated systems, inconsistent data, integrations held together with temporary fixes, and a reliance on a handful of people who understand how it all works. Operationally, that fragility leads to outages, manual workarounds, and slow change. Strategically, organizations struggle to deliver their digital ambitions because every change is harder, costlier, and riskier than it needs to be. And then, from a regulatory standpoint, poor architecture directly impacts on data integrity, customer safety, and ability to demonstrate compliance. So unmanaged architecture isn't just inefficient, it creates risk exposure at executive and board level.
So in this day and age of higher regulation and compliance, managing that risk is really important.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. It's critical, I think.
So just let's dig a little bit deeper. So from your work with social housing providers, what do you see as the common signs that a provider's reach a tipping point where the enterprise architecture actually needs addressing?
There are a few red flags that show a provider is hitting that tipping point. Change feels slow or chaotic. Every project is harder than expected, and dependencies appear later in the process. Data doesn't tie together. Different teams give different answers to the same question. You see shadow systems emerging, teams building spreadsheets, access databases or standalone apps because the core systems just are not meeting their needs. There's a higher integration effort. So simple changes require weeks of technical analysis. The growing compliance pressure, organizations can't evidence asset, customer or safety data with confidence. People don't understand end-to-end processes. So everyone knows their part, but no one sees the whole picture. So when we see these systems appear, it's usually a sign that the underlying architecture is working against the organization rather than enabling it.
So it's an internal issue that is potentially slowing the organization down, making it more efficient, put it at risk. So we've looked at sort of the negatives. How does good enterprise architecture help boards and exec teams align technology decisions, with strategy, risk appetite, and financial sustainability?
Good architecture gives leadership clarity. It translates strategy into practical design principles. For example, how the organization handles data what the level of consolidation is desirable, where automation makes sense, and what risks are acceptable. So with that clarity, technology investment becomes deliberate and not reactive. Boards understand the trade-offs, cost versus control, flexibility versus standardization, and innovation versus risk. Decisions become repeatable because they follow a shared framework. Roadmaps align to outcomes rather than vendor promises or internal assumptions. So ultimately, enterprise architecture helps leaders make decisions with confidence because it connects the dots between strategy, operations, and technology in a transparent and evidence-based way.
So when you're working with social housing providers and you're talking about enterprise architecture, what are the key pitfalls that you tell leaders to watch out for when embarking on an enterprise architecture program? This could be around overcomplexity, cost, and organizational buy-in.
Yes, Stu. The most common pitfall is trying to do too much too quickly. Enterprise architecture doesn't need to be a multi-year enterprise-wide overhaul. It should be incremental and pragmatic. Other pitfalls include creating architecture for architecture's sake, just producing documents that no one uses, over-engineering the models, going into unnecessary technical depth that slows pace, failing to engage with the operational teams. If people don't see the practical benefit, they won't adopt it. Not linking architecture to real business problems. If it doesn't solve issues people feel day to day, it won't land with them. Underestimating the cultural aspect is as much about alignment and behavior as it is about, nice diagrams and systems. So as a successful approach is simple, business focused, and delivers value quickly.
I think what you're saying there, Chris, is keep it simple and really engage common sense when you're going down this route. And it's more of a marathon than a sprint.
Yeah.
Okay, so just finally, for housing providers considering their first serious step into enterprise architecture, what does a sensible, proportionate starting point look like?
A good starting point is to build a high-level view of your current state, what the key systems, data flows, core processes, and major pain points are. This doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be directionally correct. Then, you start to move on to establish a small set of architectural principles. For example, we'll have a single source of truth for customer and asset data. We'll minimize duplication of functionality across systems. We'll prioritize solutions that support regulatory compliance. We'll design processes end to end and not in departmental silos. And, from there, we can then start to focus on a handful of priority areas where better architecture will have an immediate impact. Data quality, system consolidation, integration simplification, and automation. That proportional approach, gives providers structure, clarity, momentum, without really getting bogged down in unnecessary detail.
Excellent, Chris. I think that was really summed it up as the starting point for anyone wanting to go down this route. And it also wraps up this episode of the Shaw Consulting podcast. So thanks very much, Chris.
Thanks, Stuart.
And as always, organizations wanting support can contact Chris via LinkedIn or the Shaw Consulting website. So thanks for listening and watch out for more Shaw podcasts coming soon. Thank you.